Okay. So I thought if you could each talk about what you do professionally, but I also thought it'd be interesting for each of you to talk about how you got to where you are. Like Laura, you grew up in a political family. Sean, you're kind of like me. You didn't plan to work in politics or be involved with it, but that's the way our careers went. So
Yeah.
if you could kind of work that into each of you talking about, you know, what you've done and what you're doing now.
Ladies first, yes. Well, hi.
Oh, can I just stop you for a minute? Just want to tell the students, sorry, Laura. Students have some questions for you, which are great, but I'm almost going to tell you, put your questions aside, listen to what Sean and Laura are going to talk about, and then just, as I said, have a conversation, ask them something about something they said, and, keep your questions. They're good. We can get to them, but probably the best way these things work is kind of what we've just been doing, just having a nice conversation. Sorry, Laura, I just wanted to get that out there before you started.
Okay, rules and regulations first. I like rules, so that's fine. I'm Laura. Like Rich said, I came from a political family, and actually Sean and I both worked with Rich years ago, but my dad actually worked with Rich when I was a kid. And that was the first time I met Rich, was my dad. They worked together in a legislative office in New Jersey. And on days off from school and summer vacations, I didn't go to camp. I didn't do any of the kids stuff. I would go to work with my dad and ask to be put to work. So I would file or answer the phones and do that kind of stuff. And I absolutely loved it. When I was just starting college, I got an internship at the Democratic State Committee here in New Jersey, which led to me working on a gubernatorial campaign for Jim McGreevey. He lost that year, but then he ran again 4 years later, and I actually worked for him in between. So that was actually the first time I worked with Rich in Woodbridge Township. And then McGreevey worked on his second campaign, went to the governor's office. And then he resigned in 2004. And we didn't have a lieutenant governor in New Jersey at that time. So the Senate president automatically became the acting governor. So that was a guy named Dick Cody. He asked me to stay on and work for him in his governor's office. And then when his term was up, a guy named John Corzine became the governor. And he asked me to stay on and work for him in his governor's office. So I worked in the governor's office for 8 years, but I worked for 3 different governors. And then John Corzine ran for re-election against Chris Christie, and Chris Christie won. And so, in situations like that, we work for Democrats, we're Democrats. And so, we're what they call political hires in state government. And so when a governor of a different party comes in, all the political hires are let go, and they bring in their own people. So I was let go. And then I worked at a prominent law firm in New Jersey doing business development, communications, and marketing. And then I had been there for about 1.5 years, and a former colleague of mine and Sean's from Corzine's governor's office was opening up her own public affairs firm. And she asked me to come with her to start her firm. And that was in January, late 2011. And that's still where I work today. Public affairs is kind of the intersection of, politics, government, and media, and the private sector. And so the easiest way to explain what we do is that we take the strategies and tactics that are used on political campaigns and help to apply them to private companies or other entities that are looking to accomplish specific goals and need, the support of the public or decision makers in government. And so that's where I am, and I've been there for 9 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So my sort of, journey is a little bit different. I'm glad to hear that you guys have these diverse backgrounds, right? Because the one thing I would tell you is that you just never have any idea where you're going to end up or what you're going to end up doing, right? Right now, you guys know what you do and you love what you do. And not to say that you won't do that, because you may end up moving forward, being a biologist, being a chemist, being what it is that you're studying. But that doesn't preclude you from doing other things at the same time, right? You can diversify a little bit. So it's good that you're not just like solely focused on one thing and you're trying to expand to as much as you can. Like I will tell you, I come from a sort of long line of like roofers and truck drivers, right? I'm the first person in my family to graduate college. When I graduated college, I was sort of directionless, right? I did a bunch of different things. I did advertising, I did PR. I worked in the back office of a financial institution. And I was just kind of having fun, to be honest with you, right? And then one of my friends worked for McGreevy, who Laura just talked about. He was the mayor of a town in New Jersey. This guy I went to college with that I used to live with. And when then Governor McGreevy, when he first won, our friend Jamie asked me to come and volunteer for a couple of weeks and just write press releases and do stuff sort of in the interim after winning, but before he takes over as governor, right? There's a whole process there where they start to get things in place of, you know, who is going to work where. To Laura's point, right? You get rid of all the sort of old political people who worked there before, because you switch from one party to another party. So necessarily when those people leave, other people come in and get jobs, right? So I go and I volunteer for a couple of weeks, and then I end up getting hired there. And Rich is one of my bosses at that point. And I will just say on a quick side note, I kind of feel bad for you guys that you're not going to get to do like in-class things, because Rich is actually one of the best bosses I've ever had, right? Our boss at the time, the governor, was a driven and difficult man. And if you look him up, you'll come to find out that he left office because he resigned. He came out of the closet and resigned, right? So for 2.5 years, he's governor. My job is to basically drive around with him and do like handle press for him. And it was difficult, right? It was a difficult job. He was a very demanding boss. But to this day, Laura and I still talk about, like, there's a couple things that were ingrained in us from working for him, right? One was we work in seconds, not minutes. And we still do with anything we do. And I still don't understand when I send an email and people don't respond to it right away, which is kind of insane. And we also sort of live by, do you think or do you know? Because you'd be in a high pressure situation and the governor of the state of New Jersey is asking you a question and you need to know the answer, right? And you can't say, well, I think it's this, because he's about to tell 15 reporters what you tell him. So you would say to you, do you think or do you know? Because I don't actually care what you think, right? I'm about to say that we spent $50 million on this project. Is that a real number, right? So almost every day I would come back off the road and go and just complain to Rich, like, why is this so insane? This job stinks, right? So he resigns. Laura said, you know, there's another governor who comes in. He finishes out that term. Then the third governor she mentioned, John Corzine, comes in. They fire me. I go work someplace else for a year. What I was told was that I was too closely associated with the first governor, McGreevy. Then after a year, they hire me back because everything's kind of like a mess, right? So you get hired back, you go, you work there for another few years. And then I ran the communication shop in the campaign against Chris Christie, right? Campaign for governor. So it was a big deal for me. And then we lost. So the day before election day, I can get anyone on the phone in the entire state. The day after we lose, nothing, man, like just nothing, right? So then I start working on campaigns. I have to open up my own company because now I'm working on a campaign and they don't take out taxes or any of that stuff. So now I have to figure all that stuff out. You got to sort it out, right? So I opened my company in 2010, and the first race I do, we get our asses kicked. So now I'm just like the dumbest dude in the state, right? Then the next race I do, we lose again. Now it's like, man, I don't, you know, roofers and truck drivers, man, I might have to go and look into it, right? Then the next race I do, we're not supposed to win, and we win. And now I'm the smartest guy in the state, right? Who's smarter than Sean Darcy? And the truth is, for all these races, in between winning and losing, there's a lot of different things that go into them. And you're not the smartest person or the dumbest person, you're just what you are, right? But it's all this like weird perception that people sort of throw on you depending on if your candidate wins or loses. And that takes some getting used to. right? That took me like a little bit of time to actually sort of figure out like, all right, just block out the noise and do what you can for the people who are hiring you to try and help them win, try and help them achieve whatever their goal might be. So, you know, it's been 10 years, right? I have my business open 10 years. I have a bunch of different clients. I work with 3 different members of Congress. One of my clients now is former governor of New York, David Patterson. I've been working with him since he left office, which is 10 years ago now, 9 years ago, right? It's a long time. So
I just saw him playing the guitar in a bar.
Yeah. So like, the guy's crazy, right? I love the guy. It's like, he's one of my favorite people. He and his wife were walking down the street, and he was saying to his wife, you know, years ago, my parents tried to make me play guitar, and I stopped playing it. I really wish I hadn't done that. And he's like 63, 64, something like that. And I swear to God, this is a true story. They walk out of a park, they walk down this street, and they see on a pole, there's like, you know how you'll have like a flyer and it'll say like pull a tab for like this number or whatever. There's a flyer that says, do you want to learn how to play guitar? Call this number. So she pulls the thing, she reads him the thing, and he's like, oh yeah, I'm going to do it. So then he starts taking lessons for the last like 3 months. And then this past weekend, they're at some bar in the city. He introduces the guy who was teaching him. And then he jumps in for like 2 songs, surprises his wife, surprises the crowd, right? He played 2 songs, and he's super excited. So what I took from that is, again, don't ever limit yourself, right? Because like that guy 6 months ago wasn't someone trying to play guitar and go to like a outside bar and learn 2 songs and surprise his wife, right? That's a pretty cool thing. So that's my background, right? My background is kind of, to be honest with you, sort of very lucky, very fortunate that I knew the dude from college, very fortunate that I worked some races that we've won. You know, like I said, now I work with 3 different members of Congress. I do, we're working on a statewide ballot question now to legalize marijuana. I do stuff like in towns for senators. It's a pretty lucky life, right? I get to meet interesting people and do interesting things, and I would have never seen that. Damn, how long ago is it now? You would ask me in 2000, 2001, which you couldn't have because I don't think you would be born. I would have never guessed sort of where I am now, right? Just very lucky. Very lucky.
Okay, right. Yeah, you reminded me, I mean, of working for Jim McGreevy and how driven he was. But I'm just like you, there's things that I learned in that job that I, take with me, all the time, the way I approach different tasks. And, when you said you have to know, you can't think, I remember the story, Sean, wasn't there a time when like the governor was going up to speak and he asked you for a question, you had like 10 seconds or less to find the answer to it?
So on a program, right, like on any given day, on a program, he's the governor, so he speaks last. There's always going to be someone who sort of is the MC person, and they're going to introduce anywhere from probably 2 to 3 people before him. So he's sitting there, and he's looking at his like notes and his remarks because he would only look at stuff once it was like 2 minutes away. And he realizes he doesn't have the number for like literally it was like a transportation project. He's like, so when he calls me up, right, and he had this like unique ability to just kind of like not yell at you, but say like real like borderline mean stuff in front of people, and people couldn't for whatever reason, they were just like, oh, it's the governor, he's the best, right? So he calls you over and he's like, hey, when we drove in, there was a building that we passed that we gave state money for, like, was it 45 million or 50 million? By the way, in the scheme of it, no one would have cared, it wouldn't have mattered, right? And I'm like, oh, well, let me find out. And now this is like before smartphones, right? It's just like flip phone nonsense. So I'm like, let me find out. In my head, I'm like, all right, they're on the second speaker. I know that there's 2 speakers before him. So I have about 6 minutes. Turn around, grab the phone. In my head, I'm like, I don't even know who I would call for this, right? Like, I just have no idea. So I called the transportation commissioner and was just like, I mean, this is like a grown person, right? Like a respected person who's like making good money and came from like the transportation sector. In generally, these are people who are knowledgeable at their job. So now I'm like, look, I don't care. I'm like, do you think or do you know? Right? Like, I don't care what you think. Like, what is the number? Right? So I get that number. Then like we're at this like facility and it's like a, some other big shot who's running it. And I grab that guy and like coming in, you're like, oh, like Mr. Smith. But now it's like, Joe, is this number right? So he's looking at me like, who are you? And I'm like, I'm the guy who's asking you if this number's right? Because now I got about 45 seconds because I could hear them starting to actually introduce this guy. So turns out the number's right. I put on a piece of paper, slide it to him. He just walks up there, no problem. But that, like, for like 5 minutes, I was like, man, this job sucks.
And that was maybe not that dramatic, but that was every day. There was always something
Every
like
day. Every
Yeah.
day.
Every
Yeah.
day.
It was crazy. I remember we used to sometimes bring his daughter with us. I hate to say this, but like if we knew that there was going to be like really terrible questions coming up, we'd bring his daughter with us, his wife and his daughter, and then like he'd do like whatever the actual event was for. Because what would happen is that, say if you were going to go and you're trying to, like, you know, promote reading for kids, right? The press, like, there's not 20 members of the press there because they care about reading for kids. They're there because they want to ask about whatever the latest controversy thing is. So we figured out pretty quickly that if we brought his wife and his daughter, we could then sort of say to them, like, well, look, first you got to listen to the thing about reading, right? And then he's going to take questions over here, separate from his wife and his daughter. And then then it helps you manage the scene, helps you manage the situation. And you'd figure out sort of different sort of tricks, for lack of a better put it, to try and help you manage the situation. And that 100% has served me in my life, right? Because obviously it's not that trying to like direct press hordes anymore, but it's like any problem can be overwhelming if you allow it to just look like one big problem instead of unraveling it piece by piece, right? And that, I learned that there. That was like exceptionally helpful for me moving forward.
Yeah, and one of the things that we did early on in the semester, because the semester started, I think, right after the Democratic convention, and the first week was the week of the Republican convention. I looked at some of the things that the other party was doing to kind of counter the strategies that, you know, like when during the Democratic convention, I think Trump was on Sean Hannity at the same time as Biden's speech, and then I think some things came out Monday at the Republican convention. So I mean, it's very similar to kind of the process that Sean was talking about, where you just, you know, manage things differently.
Yeah, so I mean, for Laura and I, it's similar in the sense that when you're working like a new client or a new project, generally, if you have the sort of money to do it, you're going to try and get some polling and some data that's going to help you set what direction you're going to move forward towards, right? So that data will set that data, like when you drill down to it, that'll actually not even just tell you top lines, which would be like, you do a poll and it says that, you know, Biden's up 51-49, right? But if you were to go into what they call crosstabs and you look in those crosstabs, that'll tell you actually like ages of people who are for Biden or for Trump. That'll tell you their ethnicity. That'll tell you like anything you want to know demographically about these people. So a lot of the things that you guys are hit with, a lot of the information that comes to you, it's purposeful, right? Like when you probably don't do Facebook anymore, but like when you're on Instagram or one of those things, right? The ads that you're seeing are targeted towards you, right? They know exactly who they're talking to and they know what you like, and it's from this data, right?
It's always about what I talked about the day before. I like talk about Star Wars, and then I have ads for Star Wars and
Yeah.
toys for Star Wars, and I'm like,
beyond even tracking you like that, though, like they sort of generalize. I say we sort of generalize, right? Like your age, your ethnicity, your demographic, and then they try and target you, right? And not like target you in a, I guess, negative way, but like
marketing.
I don't know, like this data sort of drives these campaigns.
So you know, thinking about it in terms, to give a specific example, like Sean's saying, so, you know, Mary, you said you're from Carmel, New York, right? Yeah. And your parents are Trump people. Looking at the top lines of polling, given your age and that you're from New York State, many would think that you were predisposed to be pro-Biden, right? Because so many younger people in New York are liberal and tack that way. But then once you dig into that data that Sean's talking about a little bit more and get below the top lines and start looking at, well, wait, okay, not all of New York is cut from the same cloth, and not all young people in New York are pro-Biden. And then looking at where you're from and looking at some of those other factors, that's all data that informs, you know, the campaigns and the way they're run now, and how, you know, folks, both political campaigns and what I do, right, is looking at that data and looking at what you have, who you need to talk to, where they spend time, and what messages are impactful to those people.
So that would determine like how you get people to vote for who you're endorsing. Like that would determine what you do and where you go.
Yep. So you do you do polling to see which of your campaign messages seem to resonate and who they resonate with, and then you look at, all right, well, there's this group of people who don't like us at all. No matter what we say, we could say we're going to give you free puppies and free ice cream every day. They don't even care because they just don't like us. So we'll put them over here. We don't even want to talk to them. But then there's people who we don't even have to give them ice cream. They love us no matter what. We could take their ice cream away and they would still love us. So we put them, over here. You want to talk to them a little bit just to make sure they're still on your team, but
You're not trying to spend money on them.
you don't want to waste resources on them because they're already with you. But then in the middle are people who aren't sure yet. They haven't made a decision on the issue or the candidate one way or the other. And so that's when you start to look into that data and you say, all right, well, there are some people who think that, they would love it if we gave them ice cream every day, but they don't care about puppies. But then there's these other people who love puppies and don't care about ice cream. So you start kind of being able to look at that and then say, all right, well, we might be able to get the support of the only puppy people and the only ice cream people, but here's how we should talk to them. We'll talk to them differently because they have different priorities and they care about different things. Right. And so that's how, it just starts from that initial polling, but the thought process in creating the poll is that you're going to get that information on the back end. So you want to make sure you test all different things about what you talk about and how you talk about it and the language that you use, because all of that influences different people in different ways.
The other measurable, right, is that there's a sort of giant database, and basically they know if you vote. They don't know who you voted for, so like nothing crazy like that, but it's ranked sort of 1 of 4 voter, 2 of 4 voter, 3 of 4 voter, 4 of 4 voter. A 4 of 4 voter is someone that we know is going to come out and vote every year, whether it's a presidential or it's a school board election. They're coming, they're voting, right? So you have registered Democrats, you have registered Republicans, and then you have people who are just independent. So a 4 of 4 Democratic voter, I'm not talking to them. Right? Like say in a presidential or something where you're doing a partisan race, I'm not spending a dime on them because I know that they're coming and I know who they're voting for, right? Oh, like a 1 of 4 voter is a person who is just like, oh, it's a presidential year, I'm going to vote, right? So you sort of rank these people, you figure out what your resources are, and you rank these folks to see who you're going to actually try and speak to. Knowing that like if you do TV costs a lot of money, right? So there's TV, there's radio, there's digital, and then there's mail pieces. I do a lot of mail pieces and a lot of digital. I'm trying to think if there's other ways that like sort of you can differentiate these folks, right?
Well, yeah, there's out of home too, and there's, you have to look at, if you know that you have a broad-based audience, you can look at things like TV or radio or out of home, like billboards or posters.
So like for instance, right, we're doing the marijuana question. So we are speaking to a very sort of like unique group of people, right? We know that like generally it tests well. We know that like it should be okay, but we also know that there are low propensity voters, meaning people who don't always come out. And it's sort of like younger, it's like this specific. It's like younger white women are the people that we are now trying to communicate directly with to try and make sure that they stay on the ballot and that they vote yes for this question. Like you can drill down that crazy deep, like it's insane like how deep you can go with the data. So like right now, we can know right now like how many, like if you vote every year, right, which is crazy. Like we wouldn't know who you voted for, but we can know right now, like if you're like a 1 of 4, 2 of 4, 3 of 4, 4 of 4 voter, which is a little scary, right?
Like you just need a name to figure that out.
And your name and address.
Okay. Yeah, that is scary. That's crazy. I didn't know that there was something like that.
Yeah.
I was gonna say one creepy thing about the algorithms, which I'll share with you, is my father passed away 2 years ago, but So I had done something about him on WordPress a year after he died, and every year on his birthday, I'll repost it. And WordPress, they suggest similar posts or posts this person might like. My father was an arch conservative, and it suggested a Roger Stone post for him. And this is someone who's been dead for 2 years. And 3 years, and it did it. The other thing I wanted to say is you guys are right on target because I wanted to talk about crosstabs with the class this week because we're doing polls.
Oh.
And last semester I did something, it was easy to do in class. I don't know how we'll do it online, but we do a lot of work with the Siena poll. And what's nice about them is they break it down by regions of the state. And New York being what it is, you can always see a large difference between how the New York City area people react to a question and the rest of the state does. So
yeah, state downstate in New York is always very unique.
yeah. So okay, we've been talking a lot. Let's see what the students have to ask. I mean,
Oh yeah.
Jessica, what would you like to know from Sean or Laura or both of them? So.
This is for both of you guys. I said, do you think your parents and like where you were born and grew up have a large role to play in your political beliefs, or that they develop on like by yourself over time?
I mean, for me, mine, it was definitely my parents and their beliefs. I mean, my parents always joke we're, well, I'm not practicing, but I was a Catholic, and I was, baptized and did all the first communion and all that jazz. But the joke always has been since I was born that I was baptized a Democrat because my mother's super liberal and my dad was super liberal and worked on campaigns and worked for Democratic elected officials. And so for me, it was, who knows, but I don't think I would have chosen differently, but it was most definitely influenced just by virtue of the fact that, they were super liberal and super active in politics. So my dad got me into it, but after I was already working in government and politics, my mom ran for state senate, and she served on, a couple commissions in the town where I grew up, and, ran for some local stuff. She served on school board for a number of years. So they're both, liberal and active. So that definitely played a huge part.
Very different for me. My parents were not politically active. They're Democrats, but I think they became more active Democrats once I started working for Democrats. Politicians for me were just names on lawn signs when I was growing up. So, very, very different. Like I just, I don't know, like I only work for Democrats now. Obviously I sort of, that's what I believe in. But when I was growing up, it was just like, how a lot of people now are like politicians, like that. That's kind of how I was. It just wasn't a thing for me.
Let me ask the students, how much are you influenced by, your parents' beliefs, or even if they are politically active? Jessica, what would you say?
I mean, my parents, like, especially now, it's like they talk about it a lot. So it's definitely something that I hear a lot, and it definitely influences me because I've looked up to them my whole life. So why wouldn't I look up to them now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Mary, I know you made the point that your parents are, Trump supporters, and it seems like you're trying to sort it out for yourself.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I think that my mom is kind of more open, and she'll definitely kind of change. She'll like go back and forth with her opinion on both sides sometimes. But my dad, like sometimes I'll challenge a certain thing or something, and he gets very like angry and that like he's right. There's no other right answer. There's nothing I can say to make you believe that anything I'm saying, like even if I'm telling him, oh, I know, or I'm not saying I'm right to him. I'm like saying this is just another opinion. These are just other facts that I'm trying to tell him, not to change his opinion, but just to show him that there are other opinions. Like he doesn't want to hear it. It's Trump's the best, and that's it. There's like that at the end of the day, that's it. So like I think for me it's like hard because like I want to listen to him and I want to like hear what he has to say, but it's very hard to have a conversation because like I don't always agree. So I'm not getting like my point listened to, so there's no like learning. it's just like the conversation stops there, and like I have to get out. I have to leave the house. I can't like, hear it anymore.
It almost sounds like it's like logging onto social media and trying to convince someone of a different opinion.
And it's like then it turns into a fight, and I'm like, I'm not trying to fight about this. Like it's like, you know.
Yeah, it's not a dialogue. It's one-sided.
Yeah, it sounds like a microcosm of the country. So
Yeah, but like, look, on the bright side, it's almost over.
Yeah.
You know, but like Thanksgiving at least will be a little bit better. You won't be fighting about it, maybe.
I hope, because then we're home for the semester.
Yeah, our semester. You're right. You're right, because they don't come back after Thanksgiving.
Oh.
They have to do the last 3 days of classes online, and then they have an exam period, and then a grading period, because the university didn't give the 2-day midterm break over a long weekend, and they just figured that way we have less travel, we have less exposure to COVID. So it's different.
Wow.
Mary, did you have a question you wanted to ask? I know.
I was just gonna add, like, but I think that, like, as far as like them controlling my opinion, I would say like no, like there are things that I've like taken into account from like hearing my parents' opinion, but I've kind of tried to stay like in the middle and just like open to hearing anything. So I would say I mean, I don't know if like to share this, but like I'm registered as independent, just like I don't really know like where I fully stand yet.
And I don't think it's controlling your opinion. It's influencing your opinion.
Yeah.
Staying open is good though, right?
Yeah.
I would say probably the best thing that ever happened for me was going away to college, because I got to see sort of different points of view, different opinions. I met people I would have never met. Like, so if you were sort of asking about does like where you grew up impact it? And I can tell you, like, although these people were just names on lawn signs to me, when I go online, I see a bunch of people I grew up with who are, I mean, not only are they like pro-Trump, but they're just like some of the most hateful people that I've seen, right? They talk to each other in a way online that you would never talk to someone directly face to face. And some of their opinions on just sort of maybe people who need help with like this thing or that thing is it's kind of shocking to me, right? Because I didn't grow up like in a huge place. I grew up in West Orange, New Jersey, and I feel like we all had pretty similar backgrounds. So it's just interesting to see decades and decades later how different we are. You know, it's interesting. But I do think it's the greatest thing that ever happened for me was being able to leave my town and just sort of meet other people and, you know, keep my mind open the way you're talking, Mary, right? It's important. It's important to sort of open yourself up to new things.
Other questions either of you have?
I wanted to ask, how do you both think that the media will affect this year's election?
Can you repeat that? You kind of froze a little bit.
Yeah.
How do you think that the media will affect this year's election?
Oh, you can take that one first.
Look, I think that you can turn on and listen to whatever point of view you have, right? You don't necessarily have to be challenged anymore. When we were growing up, it was different, right? You had like a very limited, finite number of stations to watch. And now if I'm a conservative, I'm going to put on Fox News and they're going to tell me that, you know, Trump didn't say whatever about veterans and he never lied about the virus. Or I'm going to put on MSNBC and they're going to tell me that he murdered 200,000 people and, like, you know, act accordingly. I'm still a person who doesn't believe that CNN is biased. I just think that the president has done a really masterful job of creating and sowing doubt in people's minds in what should be reliable institutions. And by doing that, you actually shake the sort of foundation of democracy a little bit, right? Because if you have the luxury of just sort of taking any bit of data that you don't agree with and saying that it's fake or it's not true, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, that's a problem, right? That's problematic because that's like, you're essentially saying that like science isn't real. You're saying that anything you hear on this station, if it's against my guy or for my guy, is either right or wrong. And that's just, it's dangerous, frankly. I think it's dangerous. And I don't think it's going to change. I think it only gets worse. Like no matter who wins, I think this situation gets worse as far as the way people discuss things with each other, the way they treat each other, the way they talk to each other. And I'm not saying like Republicans. I'm saying Democrats, Republicans, just people. It's crazy. So I think the media is going to have a huge say in it, but not in a rational way, right? Like I don't know how to explain it. I think it's irrational. Like I have an older brother, right? And he drives an hour and a half each way to work every day. And he's had the same job for like 30 years. So for like the longest time, he was telling me about these like radio programs with like Alex Jones and these sort of like conspiracy right-wing folks that I'd never heard of until like 5 or 6 years after they were already sort of popular and out there. And he used to send me these things and I just think, man, this is just some wacko nonsense, right? But like, who cares? And then I swear, like no joke, like 5 or 6 years later, the dude was like mainstream, like he was being quoted as like a thing. And it's like, there's a lot of that out there on the left and the right, right? You can just tune into whatever you want to tune into that's going to validate your opinion and make you right. And that's sort of where we are now. I'd love to be wrong. If I'm wrong, please, somebody here tell me. You know what I mean? I'm wrong a lot, so like it wouldn't hurt my feelings.
I think you're right. One of the things I usually challenge the students to do at the end of the semester is come up with a plan to fix it. Figure, they're the ones who are going to have to live with the system.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, you got to shove us out of the way, man, and make this stuff better because we're not changing it.
Yeah, we just keep messing it up.
Sucks, but like, I wish we were.
Well, I
but
mean,
we're not.
we being.
This guy.
No, you're not in your 70s. 70-year-old white men. Get out of the way.
Hey, we're hitting there. I've been sitting around the corner taking lots of notes because I teach journalism and news writing, and I'm just writing down everything you say. So I didn't walk away. I'm just around the corner because I have more table space here.
Off camera.
Yeah, I'm actually recording it, but like when I put it up for the class, like I'll edit out all our talk about Long Beach Island and stuff.
Be strict to business.
Yeah.
I
Go ahead.
have to go because I work at 4, so I have to leave now. But I'll definitely watch the rest once it's uploaded.
Okay.
So I had a very nice time meeting you guys and talking with you. I enjoyed everything that you had to say.
Yeah,
It was
nice
great meeting you.
Look, honestly, if you have any questions or anything comes to you later, don't hesitate to just have Rich send it to us, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Anything, any questions, anything you want to talk about, any thoughts you have?
Yeah.
Okay.
In the meantime, stay safe and be healthy, right?
Yeah. Wash your hands.
You
Wear a mask.
too. Bye.
Bye. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to take up, too much of your time. Actually, as you were talking, I muted myself, and I wanted to ask Ann a question because she has a better memory than me. And this is your 10-year anniversary this month, right?
It is Friday.
Yeah.
Friday. Well, congratulations.
Yeah,
Thank
10
you.
years.
I
Yeah.
was going to ask if you guys met, like, in your jobs.
We did. So the friend that Sean referenced that got him into work for McGreevy.
Right, you both mentioned that friend, I think.
Yeah, so he worked for McGreevy on the first campaign that I worked on also. So he had already known Sean, I met him, and so we all worked together when McGreevy went into the governor's office. And so, we hung out, and that's how we met and started dating, and the rest is history.
So did the governor go to your wedding?
He did.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah, they got married on the beach in New Jersey, which is
So nice.
Yeah.
Kidding.
Yeah, it was fun. We had a good time. The beach in Long Branch, which now, like 10 years later, is completely built up. It's crazy. Really,
Yeah.
weird condos and craziness. Wouldn't even recognize it. But it was cool. We had a fire pit, s'mores. It's nice.
It was fun.
yeah.
You had a Springsteen cover band.
That's right. We did.
That was great. That was a
Total
beautiful
jerk.
wedding.
There were people dancing on the boardwalk who weren't part of the wedding. So
They
the
were
video
just walking by, and they would stop and dance because the music was
was good. Yeah,
pumping.
it was a good band.
Getting
And the food was a clam bake.
It was everything. We had.
It was
we had,
everything. It was
We had
great.
everything from lobsters to hot dogs.
yeah.
I wouldn't have it any other way.
No,
What did you say, Mary? Your brother's getting married?
Yeah. So COVID wedding. It
Oh
went
my
from
goodness.
people to 50.
Wow.
And the venue that they were at canceled on them, so now they're at a new venue. So very different world. But they were gonna wait to get married, and like I think both our families were saying like this could go on for 2 years. It could be over in a year. We don't know. So just like get married. You know, we'll have
The party when it's over.
Yeah,
exactly. So, but
Oh, that's awesome.
it's very cool.
yeah.
Yeah, we had the same thing. Our daughter was having a wedding with 250 people, and it ended up being 20 in the church and only 7 for the meal at a restaurant. You know,
Wow.
but anyhow, but it was all very nice.
Okay, well, I'm gonna let you guys go. Unless Mary, did you have anything else you wanted to ask? Or?
I actually just one question I had before that is still on my mind. I wanted to ask Sean. So when you worked for McGreedy and you said that he like would ask you questions that you had to answer the right question like right away. Like what happened if like you couldn't get the answer or if it was wrong? Like what would be like the consequence?
So wrong was not an option.
I was going to say, like, if he had gotten it wrong or not known the answer, he probably wouldn't have worked there for very long.
I will tell you this, right? So one day we, after 9/11, we had started rebuilding the World Trade Center. And by we, I mean like government, right? Government. So we are going to take a bunch of press folks there for a tour through the place. And one of the questions that they continue to ask is, are you going to build this on the footprint of the old building? And the point behind the question was the footprint is where a lot of people died. And you're basically building on a burial ground is kind of what the argument was. So consistently asking, and we're going to take them on this tour. And I say to folks like, look, this is actually a pretty good tour. You're going to see some real inside stuff here. It's not a day for the footprint question. So we can just sort of take the tour, ask questions about anything else, but like really rather not talk about like this being a burial ground, right? Because that's essentially what you're driving at here. So we'd start taking a tour. First question, same guy I just said it to is like, so are you going to build it on the footprint, right? And I say to the guy, Ron, we talked about this. So now the governor starts yelling at me in front of these people, right? He starts saying like, Sean, like I can answer this question. Like you don't talk to these guys like that. And I'm like, all right, right? Because every day, it's like those old cartoons, right? Like I'm on one side, they're on the other side. We basically punch out and then maybe we'll go have a beer. But now he just undermined anything I could possibly do moving forward. If I'm going to tell these people they can or can't do something, why are they going to listen to me? Because he just blew me out. So now we leave, right? And there's this giant escalator. So the governor goes like this to me, calls me over, and he's got a guy, he's called a body guy. This guy has has his bag with like all like materials, things he's going to need over the course of the day. He's also got 3 state troopers, right? They're like the sort of executive protection unit. So when the governor does this, the body guy tells the 3 executive protection people to take 3 steps down on this escalator. I walk up, and now the governor's just screaming at me on this escalator, screaming at me, right? So I asked the body guy later, like, hey, why did you have you guys take a few steps down? He's like, I figured I'd just let you get yelled at like a man. We didn't need to hear that, right? So now we come up to the street. This dude is screaming at me still, right? And I look and think about this. There's like 2 giant SUVs, right? Black SUVs, tinted windows, the whole thing, because that's how we travel. So I look over here as this guy's screaming at me, and there's this little Japanese guy across the street, and he's taking pictures of us. He doesn't know who we are, but he's like, oh, there's 2 guys in suits. There's like 3 armed people, and there's these 2 SUVs. It got to be somebody, right? So he's taking a picture. So I'm looking at the governor as he's screaming at me, and I just start looking over his shoulder. So he turns around, and he's like, what? I'm like, starts taking pictures of us. So he's like, I guess I just stopped yelling at you in the street then, right? So I'm like, yeah, maybe, right? So now we hop in the trucks, and I'm like, in my head, I say to the 2 troopers I'm driving with, because the governor's in a different truck, I'm like, that guy's gonna call. When he calls, I don't want to talk to him, because sometimes he would like yell at you, and then he'd call. Like Laura could speak to this. Rich probably never made a mistake in his life. So
Yeah.
like Laura and I
Rich never got yelled at by the governor.
He'd call and he'd be like, look, I just like, he wouldn't apologize. He would say like, look, I think you can just do better, and I want you to do better, right? So sure enough, the next stop, he had broken his leg. So now we're going to the doctor so he can get his leg looked at. And he
not like
me.
that same day, like it way before.
So he calls me from the doctor's office, and I go up to the doctor because he's still my boss. I can't just say like screw, right? I got to go do it. So starts in on me again. I go, look, can I ask you a question? Either one. I'm like, is this one of the situations where I just got to eat it, or can I actually explain to you what just happened? So he's like, what? I'm like, you just made it where I can never stop them ever from doing whatever they want to you, right? We had an understanding that they can do this, but they can't do this, and you just blew it up. And now moving forward, anytime they want to do something, you made it where they can. And he's wrong, right? So he just goes, I mean, I just want you to do better. I was like, this guy. So the answer is, like, I don't think you could really be wrong. I would be more inclined to sort of say, like, you know, I couldn't get that answer. And the other thing, and this is just me, and I think Laura's the same way, I know Rich is the same way. In this life, you can also work with people who won't take responsibility for their actions. We at some points would work with people who not only wouldn't take responsibility for their own actions, they would actually blame other people for things that they did wrong. And you suss those people out quickly, and you figure out if you want to work with them or not.
Another piece of it is, if you're asked something and you don't know or you can't find out, to have an alternative in mind, right? So you asked me for this number. I couldn't find that exact number, but here's a number that I found instead, and here's why that could make sense for the argument you're trying to make, right? So it's not just saying, sorry, couldn't find it. It's having some information, you know, and not just saying, oh, well, I tried, I couldn't get it. And that's something that I've kept moving through all my different careers in my life, is like, you never want to bring a problem to the table or bring something to the table without a solution. So if someone asks you something, you know, you may not know, but you try the best you can to find out. And if you can't, you find you understand what the end game is, and you provide alternatives that, you know, maybe they tell you to, those are bad, but at least you're not just saying, putting your hands up and like, I'm this lawyer. Emoji.
Yeah. It's like being a lawyer, right? Like, you would never ask a question in court that you don't know the answer to.
Yep.
I do got to back into one thing though. I'm sort of saying like horrible things about this guy, and I will tell you, he's one of my favorite people I've worked for. Right, I learned a lot from the guy. He gave me a shot, like, just for no reason, basically. And sort of, you know, through working there, I met my wife, and I have a great career, and I'm, you know, get to do fun, cool stuff. So, like, you know, learned a lot from the guy. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
I just need to back into that, because I feel like I've left it with a pretty bad impression.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to add to that, and you've been telling these war stories, both of you, but I just want Mary to hear the reason that Sean and Laura had the jobs they did and got to where they are is because they both were very good at it. I mean, I know we had a bunch of, like, I forget what your title was, Sean, they were like these deputy press secretaries or something, but whenever we had to decide who was going to go to an event with the governor, if it was a tough one, we always knew you were the guy to do it. And Laura did the governor's schedule, which, you know, you're a gatekeeper, and, you know, probably you're telling more people no than yes, and you know, you have to know who you can say yes to, and how to say no to the other people. And then, you know, the governor, as Sean said, he was driven, which is kind of an understatement. But even when he was in Woodbridge, he would do this incredible schedule where he'd be going from the top of New Jersey to the bottom of New Jersey. And, you know, he had to get to different events. And
7 days a week, we worked 7 days a week. I will tell you too, by the third governor, Laura was basically running government, right? She was operations manager for John Corzine, which is essentially managing the cabinet, managing the executive office. So she started as like a scheduling intern in Woodbridge and ended up basically running government, right? Yeah. When they first hired me, I was answering the phones and taking down the names and numbers of people who wanted to interview McGreevy. Yeah. And I was like, man, this job sucks. But over time, right, like, you just keep going, keep pushing, and keep doing what you're doing, and hopefully it works out.
If you're not good at, like, the smaller jobs that you don't really like when you start at the bottom, then you're not going to be good at the jobs that you could work yourself up to. That's why they give you the job. So. Yeah,
and by the way, I think this is universal. You respect people more if you know that they've had to actually put the work in and do the things that they're asking you to do. Yeah. That was the one thing about McGreevy, right, is that, like, we might complain that, like, we worked a lot, but we used to all to a person say, I know that if I'm working 19 hours in a day, that guy's working 20. Mm-hmm. Like, that guy's working more than us, right? Like, he's not, like, going on vacation someplace and being like, hey, do all this nonsense. He's doing the same nonsense, right? So, like, you can't say that about every boss you've had.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that. And like also the other thing, and Rich could speak to this, you never shut your phone off. You never, like, no matter what, you were answering your phone, you were answering text messages, you were just working. And you took like pride in it, right? And we've carried that forward with us too, I think, you know?
Yeah, that was pre-smartphone days. We had, pagers or primitive Blackberries and.
Yeah. Actually, when he resigned, I was standing next to him because that was my job, was to sort of get him out of the room, right? So there's like 100 reporters in there because everybody knew that he was going to resign. So turns out that I was like on the sort of main camera feed, but didn't realize it. So afterwards, right after this guy resigns, we get him like back into his office, and then my phone starts going crazy, and people are like, "Man, I can't believe that." I'm like, "What?" They're like, "Oh, we just saw you on TV," and I was like, "Oh, you see, I got a BlackBerry, right?" They're like, "Yeah." I'm like, "You couldn't just shoot me a note and say move 3 steps to your left?" Come on. So it was good though. It was fun stuff.
Did you get a message like that at a BlackBerry in 2004?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, you got emails in real time.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, no, that's a real conversation I had. That's a real conversation I had. I was like, you couldn't just shoot me.
Yeah, no, really, that's interesting. I took all these notes while you were talking. So, I just love to take notes.